Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. I'm Jeff Jones, and today with me for episode 2, I have three guests, three standby regular guests here, and we'll just say hello to them. Big Jeff, you have your video on, so I'll say hello to you first. How are you?
Hey Jeff, I'm doing great, and thank you for the invite here. And I'm really looking forward to discussing, the railroading that Stephen got, particularly in 1985, and how the 1985 case really sets the tone for what happened in 2005.
Right on. And Kelly?
Hello, thank you for having me back. Hello, gentlemen. It's 6:30 in the morning here. I'm still waking up, but let's rock and roll.
Very good, very good. And Dr. Silkman.
Hey Jeff, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me back. Good to be here.
Thank you. And so, this is just the second time that we've put this together. Last week, for those of listeners that were there, it was a shortened version. We're still working out the kinks. I hope every iteration of this podcast gets a little bit better. We've decided to pre-record, and so I appreciate everybody for listening. And let's get right back to it. And where we left off last week. Dr. Silkman, you were just about to make some comments about about Judge Hazelwood, and so I'm going to add this into the stream here. And this is about, I think you were halfway into your comments when we had to cut you short, and so if you would just kind of get us back into that feeling, and let us know what your thoughts are on Judge Hazelwood, and maybe I'll let him play. I'll play a little bit of his shtick there.
Yeah, I mean, Judge Hazelwood, obviously he had a history with the Avery family, and he basically described the fact that the Avery family were a very tight clan that basically were by themselves. They've obviously had their issues in terms of run-ins with law enforcement. But Judge Hazelwood had a very important and critical role in Steven Avery's life. Basically, he was the judge, had to make a decision on some DNA data, some DNA information that was done back in 1996. There was a laboratory that had done some analysis, and they found alleles that weren't similar to either Steven Avery or to Penny Bernstein, found under the fingernails of Penny, because remember, she was attacked that day on the beach. And Judge Hazelwood had to make a call. He had to say either whether he believed that the results exonerated Steven or not. Unfortunately, he decided to stay with the side of the state, and he wasn't convinced with the DNA results. And as a result, Steven went back to prison in 1996. Yeah, so unbelievable.
Yeah, well, let's play a little bit of what he has to say.
Get to court each other. They do a number of things that are quite admirable, but they have also been in trouble from time to time. Nothing like the problems that Steven's been
in. I really ain't got much on my record. 2 burglaries with my friends. We just rode around to get something to do. And we decided to rob a tavern in that. It's the first time that I got busted with them friends. Another mistake I did, I had a bunch of friends over who were fooling around with the cat. And I don't know, they were kind of negative on it. I tossed him over the fire, and he lit up. It was the family cat. I was young and stupid, and hang around with the wrong people.
Stevie did do.
And so what we're seeing there is a little background of Steven Avery's problems with the law that really, for me, don't really connect anything to any of these crimes that supposedly, like a violent rape. I don't know how you put stealing sandwiches and beer and $17 of quarters along with throwing a cat into a fire. And now I know that there's like ideas of escalation, that criminals tend to escalate and get worse, but I don't know how you could draw a straight line, and you shouldn't, between these generally small infractions compared to a heinous violent crime like that was done to Penny Bernstein.
Well, Jeff, you're right that you can't. And there's a reason why in the American justice system, very often, it's even when cases where it's probably warranted, you're just not allowed to talk about previous offenses because they are not necessarily indicative of what you may do in the future. And as you said, these are very much, not anything like what we're talking about with Penny. I mean, there's not even any sign of this type of escalation. As a matter of fact, it was very important to the state. And if you read the Peg whitewash document, in the Peg whitewash document, they say that Kasurek makes the assumption that when Steven Avery ran his cousin Sandra Morris off the road, that it was sexual in nature. It was very important for the state to make Steve look as some type of sexual predator, right? They planted that seed way back when, and they dug it back up again in the Teresa Halbach case.
Right. And, I think time and time again, we see this, whether rightfully so or not, when you're trying to build a case against someone, when you're trying to change public perception, claiming that they have strange sexual desires or they have some strange sexual habits or that they're a sexual predator is often used, I don't know if propaganda is the right word, but used to change that image of a person, whether it's true or not, false accusations of sexual misconduct, etc. We've seen it time and time again throughout history. So no difference here, Jeff.
I would say that it works. I mean, the reason why they do it is because it works and it's very effective. People are very anxious to take in that and believe it, and very rarely do you see, especially against a poor defendant with no money, any type of pushback in the media or elsewhere that said, hey, maybe we should take a step back and look to see if this is really true before we go, all in believing this baloney. People just accept it, and especially when the media is your willing accomplice, then there's not much you as a defendant can do about it. It's definitely a great jury pool tainter.
There you go. I think it's a really good point you bring up about the jury pool. Let's scrub forward a little bit.
Things, but he always owned up to everything he did wrong. He never said, no, it wasn't me. He said, yeah, it was me. I did it, and paid his fine, sat in jail, whatever it was, and it was no big deal. Let's get on with life then.
She was pretty, beautiful, that's what I thought. She had a good head on her shoulders. She's making it on her own. She had Jason. Jason was just a baby. She told me that his father didn't want nothing to do with him. I said, I'll take over then.
I mean, I think that's a really important character part, for Steven to be saying this, like, well, I'll take over as dad, right, and take this other child as my own, right? And as this is the episode 1 of Making a Murderer, this is really laying out kind of the whole case. This is laying out the history. This is putting into perspective what things are to come. And I just think that it's nice to see this juxtaposition of where you have, law enforcement saying he's this horrible person, he's a sexual predator, he does all these horrible things. And then you have, through his own words, saying basically, I'm willing to help this child. I married this woman. She already had a child, and I think it humanizes Steven Avery, and I think it's important to humanize him, at least, because there has been so much said about his character. Any thoughts on that?
Well, just a couple of comments. If we can just go back a little bit, that cat burning episode, of course, was going to come back and haunt him. And the reality is that he wasn't the one that actually threw the cat in the fire. It was somebody else. But Stephen decided to take the rap, and he paid the ultimate price for it. It's important to note, guys, that all of Steven Avery's misdemeanors were trying to be brought back up in trial when he was on trial for the murder of Teresa Halbach. And the judge prevented Ken Kratz from bringing up past misdemeanors. So in essence, you're 100% correct. What the state were trying to do is they were trying to make him out to be a monster, trying to amplify all the negative and bad things that he had done in his life to really give, and I agree with Big Jeff, to give the impression to the jury, to the public, to the media, that this guy's unstable, crazy, an animal killer, reckless. And yet here we have Stephen, a young guy, willing to take on the responsibility of a young child that's not even his, and to marry Laurie. And I think that's a really noble thing for Stephen to do at such a young age.
I just wanted to say, when I first watched like Making a Murderer, and then you kind of get into like the Teresa situation, and you, like Dr. Silkman said, they were trying to bring in his past into the trial. I think they would, and you made the comment before, Jeff Jones, like, where do you draw the line to say his past has any connection? I think they were actually trying to use the cat burning as the connection, because we have this remains that has been burned, and I think they were trying to paint, look, he burnt a cat before. Now we have a female burnt. They were trying to kind of like bring that in and kind of like make that his signature, if you would. And I find that interesting as well, because I know I'm going a little bit forward in this if it comes up later, or it might not come up at all, but we have that incident where Barb's car gets burnt, and Barb and Stephen are the only ones that allegedly have the keys. And, I think you brought it up even last time, Big Jeff, or maybe it was when we were backstage, but that's still on his record, that it's still pending, that he could be still responsible for this burning of the car. Again, is that trying to create this character of him that he burns things? I just wanted to slip that in there, because I think that kind of gives it a bit of a character reference that they were trying to do to him too. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
I agree. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, 100% agree. So essentially what they're trying to say was, hey, if he hates things, if he doesn't like things, he gets rid of them by burning. And so that's a really good point by Kelly. And that's sort of like the long bow that Mr. Kratz was trying to push through the trial. That, look, hey, he has no conscience for animal life. He burnt a cat, and it wasn't him that did it. So hence, he wouldn't think twice to burn a human being, which was pretty remarkable when you think about it. Because in essence, remember, what they're trying to say is that Steven Avery was escalating in his crimes.
I think it's interesting that it's so easy for them to paint this picture of Steven Avery with this MO that's escalating, but at the same time, they can look the other way when they have another suspect, Gregory Allen, who is escalating, and they don't put those connections together.
They couldn't. They absolutely couldn't. They had to hide Gregory Allen, because the mere factor, if you think about what the civil suit was all about, it was all about Gregory Allen. So under no circumstances could the state, the MTSO, even want to mention Gregory Allen's name, because it made them look bad as well. So They had to keep that in the background and present Stephen in the worst possible light imaginable.
That's right. I think if any of us had the worst things that we've ever done in our life and it was all compressed into all these statements on one page of a paper, I know I wouldn't be coming out looking good. I'm not saying that I'm a bad person, but if you took every bad thing I ever did and put it one after the other and then presented a jury, that they would have a different reflection of character, I think.
Correct. I mean, it's pretty obvious. The state went after Steven at full maximum capacity, and they try to make him look as like a monster from the get-go.
Okay. We're at about 11 and a half minutes in the time code, just for people listening at home, and we're going to proceed.
Family's part we made. Well, I might as well give it a shot. July 24th, 1982. The judge married us. Then after that, her mom and dad threw a little wedding party there in the garage. From there, kids. Rachel was born. I didn't see her born because I was locked up for that cat innocence. Kind of sucks. You know, you're supposed to be bringing your kid into the world, and then you gotta miss it. And then Jenny, I seen Jenny born. I think I had a good life till all the trouble started.
Sandy Morris and Bill Morris, they were always picking on Stevie, more or less, you know, saying stuff about Steve that wasn't true. And Steve didn't like that, you know. But I told Steven, leave it alone.
In 1985, do you remember the morning in January when you were forced off the road by Steven?
Yes.
The interview is being conducted January 3rd, 1985 by Detective Larry Conrad of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. Steve, I'd like to ask you if you would explain in your own words exactly what happened.
It was 4:30, 4 to 5, and let the dog out and started up the car as we warmed up, and I seen her come by, and I went down the road and just pulled alongside of her, and then we hit, swing into a little skid.
Did she ever go down into the ditch?
No.
Okay, once she stopped her car, what was the next thing you did?
I got out, I grabbed the gun, she asked me what I was doing.
Was your gun loaded?
No, it was empty. Shells right home.
You know Sandy Morris personally? Is she a relative of yours?
Yeah.
Steve, can you tell me in your own words why you ran Sandy off the road and pointed a gun at her?
Because she was spinning words, and I was on the front mountain on the road, bare ass, and she was telling everybody about it, and it wasn't true.
Was this bothering you?
Yeah.
Did you feel by taking the type of action you did earlier today that this would stop the problem?
I was hoping, yeah.
Steven's
And I think his public defender is about to explain his mindset there, but there's a lot to unpack in the last minute that we just watched. Does anybody have any comment that they'd like to add or to put it into context for us? It's kind of hard to hear everything that Steven's saying.
Well, just that it's again, if we look at the PEG whitewash of this event, she states that that document states that Kasurek and Vogel assumed that the running of Sandra Morris off the road was something that was sexual in nature. And we just heard plain as day that Steven did this very, stupid thing, and he decided that he could get her to stop, spreading rumors by scaring her, essentially. running her off the road and pointing a gun at her. Now, I guess he was smart enough not to point a loaded gun at her, but that's not any excuse for doing the dangerous act of running someone off the road and causing someone that much terror in the first place. As he should have heeded Al's advice and not done anything at all. But clearly, this was not done with any type of sexual intent. He just all but admitted, said, yeah, I thought that, if I did this, it would scare her into stop spreading rumors about me, which was obviously getting to him. So I'm not sure what else there is to say about that.
I just think it's such an important. Thank you for those comments. I just think it's such an important point in this story. That is this where the revenge started? Is this where it's not where the animosity had started? Obviously, as Alan just said, they were always picking on Steven. And he told them to leave it alone. But without this incident, do the pieces continue to fall? I guess my question to you guys, if you care to answer, is like, is this really the catalyst for everything? Everything after here falls into place, or would they have gone after Steven no matter what?
I think quite possibly it was. I mean, I can see a small town sheriff's department saying, you don't do this to us. You're going to pay, and you're going to become an example of why we are untouchable. But I can totally see it, and I do believe that had it not been for this incident, they wouldn't have come after him so hard in the Penny case. And if there was no Penny case, it's highly doubtful there would have been a Teresa Hallmark case.
Interesting, yeah. One of the things that just, in real life scenarios that come up, I was just at a local gas station, and there was no gun involved, but there was like some back and forth screaming inside the gas station, and someone came out and he said, get those, you better keep my name out of your mouth, or I'm gonna come get you. And frankly, I'm not saying that it makes it right, but there are a lot of people that choose violence still to this day to solve their problems, and to pretend that Steven Avery's the first person to ever go down that path, or only horrible people have ever considered that. I think it just adds to the issues of character here that they keep building.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
I think this was very much a tipping point for Steven. Clearly, it's not an isolated incident. The fact that his cousin, Sandra Morris, was heckling him and her husband was heckling Steven, this would have gone on for a period of time. And it got to a point where Steven had had enough. Was the decision, what he did, wrong? Absolutely. Did he deserve to go to prison for what he did? Absolutely. But it was a tipping point. And I think the other important point is that Sandra Morris, you've got to ask the question, what's her role in all of this? Why was she spreading these rumors? Because as you said, Jeff, it's a small town. Once your name is on everybody's lips that, you're doing this and you're doing that, you're ruined. Your reputation in that part of town is ruined. I think Steven reached a tipping point and he had had enough. And you're correct. I've seen many guilters say, well, his intentions were sexual. And you think, wait a sec, he had a marriage. I'm sure he was happy with Laurie. What the hell is he going to try? What's he going to achieve for any type of sexual outcome with his second cousin, Sandra Morris, who, mind you, her husband works in law enforcement. So, I think that's stretching a little bit, but I do believe that this was the catalyst for everything going downhill for Steven. No question.
I think so too. And I just kind of think about Sandra Morris going to work after that, and then going to the bar. Like the attorney Glenn, I believe, asked her, were you in bars saying this stuff about Steven? Because, obviously he must have had some witnesses that said she did. And I think about her going to work and people saying, well, how was your day? What's going on? Oh, you'll never believe what happened to me today. And pretty much now she's told the whole department that Steven Avery is this really bad guy. And the way small towns work, I'm from one in this area, is you kind of pick sides. You immediately pick sides. Because if you don't believe everything that Sandra's telling you, then you're somehow against her. And to be with her, you have to accept everything she says. And then she goes to the bars and says more things about Steven Avery and the Averys in general. And you start to build this perception about their family in the public realm anyway. And so we go on and on.
I would also say that there's no doubt in my mind that Sandra Morris was legitimately traumatized by this. I can imagine if you had this happen to you or to your wife, the baby in the car, getting run off the road. There's a reason for her to be legitimately traumatized, no matter how bad of a person she was. This is a traumatic event, and I strongly suspect that this had exactly the opposite effect that Steven was intending, and it just escalated worse. And
right,
yeah.
I think you bring up a great point that's seldom respected, is that Sandra Morris did have the right to be scared and freaked out by this, and it wasn't nothing. This was something that was very wrong on Steven's part. I just find it to be one of the biggest turning points in his life. Maybe the biggest mistake. Maybe the biggest mistake he ever made. I don't know.
Yeah. So this is this happened in January, right? And the Penny rape happened 3 months later, something like that, 4 months. So it was within a relatively short amount of time that happened. So as we talk about the tainted jury pool, like this is something that the people are going to remember this, and that this helped to pre-taint the jury pool for Penny.
And if I could just add, don't forget that Steven himself was on bail, and that's when the attack on Penny Bernstein took place. So when you think about it, he had this prior arrest with the incident with his cousin, right? So if the sheriff, Kacerik, is sort of saying, well, we believe that there was a sexual component when he ran off his cousin off the road, and now you factor in a violent sexual assault on Penny Bernstein, well, then, Steven's name comes up in lights. So you think about it from the sheriff's perspective, this was a classic case of jumping the gun, so to speak, having your prime suspect right in front of you, and he saw the perfect opportunity to put away Steven essentially for a very long period of time.
And just something I'm thinking about as you say that, this is 1985. This is before DNA.
Correct.
This is the way policing was concluded. They knew, because they didn't know DNA would come out. In their minds, they knew they could do this and get away with it, because they've, not to say that they've done it before, but they know how the process works. They know, well, if you get an eyewitness account, if you do the right things, and check the correct boxes in a prosecution, you can get a jury to go along with it. And he looks close enough to the
Correct.
suspect. And I think that's one of the important things. Just, maybe let's say you never heard anything and this is the first time you ever learned about this case. Like, it's important to remember that 1985 law enforcement is vastly different than 2022 law enforcement, or even since, right? Okay. Any more comments before we scrub forward? Yeah.
I saw something on Linda's channel recently. Maybe it was her Discord channel. And she said that she had a statistic on there that said something along the lines of the number of years that DNA exonerees have served in prison prior to being exonerated is something like 5,000 years.
That's staggering.
That's a staggering number.
It's a huge number, correct. And don't forget, if you look at historical cases, Big Jeff, you could imagine that the number would be even higher, right? This is back in the days where a collection of forensic material wouldn't have been very good. And obviously a lot of forensic material would have been lost. So there's no chance to go back and retest the forensic material. But you could imagine that if you had the ability to check for DNA now, back in historical cases, the amount of exonerees will probably be huge. So it's quite shocking, a quite shocking statistic.
His actions didn't get what he was hoping. Sandy Morris happened to be married to a Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy. And she immediately went to the Sheriff's Department and filed a complaint that minimized her involvement in provoking the incident and maximized the alleged danger. I got his old records. It was usually my practice to get all the information I could on the client. Steven's school records showed that he had barely functioned in school. And one of the things I remember was that his IQ was 70, which gave me an idea of his coping skills and why that action made sense to him.
I didn't know what to do, how to handle it. You know, because it was putting too much pressure on me. People would come up to me, you're doing that, you doing that? No, not in the middle of winter. In the middle of the road.
You know, from Steven's own words, we don't necessarily have to go on this too much. But he's saying people are coming up to me and saying this, are you doing this? And what he's talking about is masturbating in the street, getting naked in the street. And as I said earlier, Sandra Morris had been around town spreading this rumor, and it kept getting back to him. Are you really doing this? And people, so that means that people are putting some credence into what she's saying.
That made me look like I was no good person.
Why did she start that? I have no idea. But I don't think it was very nice of her. Just because you're married to law enforcement doesn't give you the right to take somebody's name down like that. That was just wrong.
The Sheriff's Department responding by really going after this case heavily. More heavily than I think they would have if it was somebody else. I think Stephen was a representative in that case of the entire Avery family and how the Sheriff's Department saw them as kind of a problem and definitely undesirable members of the community, for lack of a better term. And the Morris case gave them a chance to claim a violent felony had been committed by one of the Averys. And of course, Sheriff's Department and the DA took it and ran.
I don't want to be a criminal. I want to be normal.
I think there's a good spot to stop. Yeah, go ahead. Give me some.
You know, the thing, let's think about this, guys. Imagine with all these incidences taking place with Sandra Morris, right? The fact that she's spreading all these rumors. What would have happened if Steven Avery had made a formal complaint to the sheriff? How far do you reckon that formal complaint would have gone?
None at all. I don't even think they would have picked up the piece of paper of the complaint, to be quite honest. They would have just laughed it off.
Yep, 100%. So the point I'm trying to get at is that I think Stephen really understood the heartbeat of what it was like, what law enforcement was like back then. I mean, don't forget, his own uncle worked there as well. His own uncle worked in the MTSO. So his primitive way of thinking was, okay, I'm going to put a stop to this. I'm going to scare my cousin out of her wits. That's the way he wanted to handle this particular incident, which in turn brought him on a downward spiral. everything changed for him after that incident. His life was never the same.
I agree. I think that that's very well put. We do see this here mug shot, and I don't know if you want to get into that right now, Big Jeff, or do you want to wait a minute?
Let's wait, but let's just say that this mugshot was used again by Jean Couché to reproduce or to create a visual of Steven, and we'll get. I guess we'll get into it later. But it plays an important role in Sandra Morris's eyewitness sketch. Let's put it that way.
Can I just jump in there, Big Jeff? And if you have a look at the photograph on the right, just take note of the curl of his hair on the left-hand side, top left-hand side. As Big Jeff said, this photograph is going to come back again.
After Lori had the twins, he came over to my parents' house instead of taking poor Lori home, with them twin boys and the girls. He had to come over to my parents and show us, his happy, healthy baby boys. Grin on his face from ear to ear, I think forever. He probably still has a grin when you talk about the boys.
He was over the moon. He was just so proud. And he was proud of Lori. He was proud that she wanted him and married him and all those kinds of things. He just thought his life was set. Really, he did. And that makes what happened all the worse.
July 29th, 1985. It was a warm, sunny day, and Penny Bernstein and her husband went to the beach on Lake Michigan. It was about 3 o'clock that afternoon. Penny started jogging north along Lake Michigan. She passed a person who was wearing a black leather jacket. Now, it was summer, and it was 85 degrees probably, so it was an odd thing. And he said something to the effect of, "It's a nice day for a jog, isn't it?" Penny was on her way back, and she could see ahead of her that same man that she had passed earlier. And he was directly in her path.
To get away from him, she ran into the water, but he grabbed her and dragged her off into the woods. He knocked her down. She was clawing at him, and he attempted to rape her, but he didn't succeed in penetrating her.
He ripped her clothes off. He sexually assaulted her. He beat her up and basically left her for dead. It was just real horrific. The kind of injury she had to her upper body could only be done if someone's basically in your face. So it's very personal.
After Mrs. Bernstein was taken to the hospital, it turned out that Sandra Morris's friend, Judy Dvorak, was the deputy sheriff who was assigned to go to the hospital.
I think before we get into Judy Dvorak, maybe we want to just touch base on, we heard the voice of Griesbach there. Big Jeff, is there anything that you wanted to add in here, or anything that we can share to bring context to the viewers?
Yeah, so the very first person who was talking was Michael Griesbach. Michael Griesbach was the deputy, the assistant district attorney of Manitowoc County when Steven was released in 2003. And he was under a person named Mark Rohr at the time, and it was Mark Rohr who actually requested the DCI, the Department of Criminal Investigation, to figure out what went wrong in the Avery case. I think maybe we should just let it play out a little more, and let's understand the circumstances of how he got sent in to jail to prison before we sort of dismantle the dismantle the state's case sort of piece by piece. Because it's unbelievable what happened to him, and the amount of conspiracy that it actually took to send him to jail in the first place. It slays me when the guilters say you just can't achieve that level of conspiracy. Well, we're going to, I think by the time we're done dismantling the 1985 case, it'll be quite believable that this level of conspiracy can occur. In a police case. There will be no doubt in anybody's mind.
Agreed. Just on a personal note, when I see those shots of Lake Michigan and the sand dunes, my personal experiences have been nothing but happiness and joy when I see those, because that's where I used to go as a young man and a boy to go and swim near Lake Michigan. It looked very much like this. And so just from a personal note, it's just absolutely insane to believe that this happened in daylight, in the middle of someone just enjoying a jog on a Saturday afternoon. It just adds to the level of abhorrence. But as you said, let's move on unless anyone has anything to add.
I was just going to say on a personal note, as a woman, when you're watching this for the first time and you're seeing exactly the points you just brought up, beach, sand, a woman running in the afternoon, daylight, for a woman, that is so traumatizing, because that is like a fear that's just instinctively in us as women. Like, I know anyone can be a victim of any kind of crime, but that is just like a real it's what nightmares are made of for us. So when I see that, it's a reality of how dangerous the world can be and how vulnerable you can be, even in situations where you think you're the safest. Beach, jogging, people possibly around, and yet this kind of crime can still happen.
It's really scary. It really is one of the... Anyway, thanks for those comments, Cal. Appreciate you adding that.
But the other important point here, guys, is that this was a brazen attack in daylight on a public beach where potentially there could have been other people around. So, it...
Exactly. That's what makes it scary.
Yep. You have to think of the caliber of individual that would do this, knowing how high risk it was to attack someone in an open beach in daylight.
Someone who has gotten away with it before, actually.
Yep. And also a person who's got extreme confidence in their craft, in what they are doing.
I believe that he was accused of a similar instance about a year before. Gregory Allen, that is.
That's correct. In
on
fact,
the same stretch of beach.
That's correct. He was arrested for that. And guess who was the prosecuting district attorney? Big Jeff.
How many guesses do I need? How about Dennis Vogel?
Correct. Dennis Vogel. Correct.
I was going to say, Dr. Suckman, all one has to do is go onto the Foul Play website, which we should link in the description. And there's a whole section on the 1985 case, and particularly Gregory Allen. And it's just worth taking a look at that, just to figure out what kind of an animal that guy really was. And in my mind, it's horrific that somebody like that, who is under police observation, can continue to perpetrate crimes like that again and again and again. And despite the fact that he's under police observation, continues to get away with it. That boggles my mind.
Yeah, and like you said, Big Jeff, we will unpack this, but that's correct. If I could just plug our Foul Play website, we've got a huge amount of documents pertaining to the 1985 case. We also have one of our researchers by the name of Sunshine Christina. She spent an incredible amount of time looking at the activities of Gregory Allen. And it, as you said, Big Jeff, it is truly horrific. And this was all taking place under the noses of the MTSO and the police department. Freakish.
It's breathtaking. All right, let's continue.
The hospital, it turned out that Sandra Morris's friend, Judy Dvorak, was the deputy sheriff who was assigned to go to the hospital. And this is where the Sandra Morris matter makes a difference, because when Penny Bernstein describes her assailant, Judy Dvorak says, "That sounds like Steven Avery."
Judy Dvorak lived across the road from him at that time, and she definitely did not like Steven. She had no use for him at all. And I think that boils down to the fact that her and Sandy Morris were close, very close friends.
You're the one who prepared the incident report and asked Mrs. Bernstein to read it and sign it.
Yes, sir.
All right. Bernstein told Deputy Dvorak and the sheriff that she was unable to read the statement because of her blurred vision. Bernstein was told to sign the document anyhow. Did you tell Mrs. Bernstein to sign the document anyhow?
I do not remember ever saying that.
Did Sheriff Kosorek tell Mrs. Bernstein to sign the document anyhow?
I have no recollection of ever hearing that.
I was told by other detectives that at that point, they got a photograph of Stevie from the old jail records. They brought it down, and the chief deputy, Jean Couchet, that time, made a composite drawing of that photograph rather than doing it from her memory. And then they showed that to Mrs. Bernstein, who said, "Yeah, that's him." Then they took that jail photograph and did a photo lineup. And Mrs. Bernstein picked out that photograph.
I mean, if you look at Penny Bernstein's original description, as far as height, weight, eye color, all kinds of stuff, Steven did not fit that description. Steven's hair didn't fit, the build, everything. He didn't fit that description. But Judy Dvorak said he did. I mean, wow. So they show Penny Bernstein Steven's picture. And then she sees a lineup later, and Steven is the only person she's seen before. Plus, she had the sheriff's deputy saying, "Gee, I think it sounds like this guy." That's pretty suggestive.
Mr. Couchet, I have one large framed composite drawing. If we could bring that up on the table and put it in camera range.
Yes, sir.
Did you cause this to be framed?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why'd you do that?
It was my first composite. It was the only one I ever did that was used in a court case. And I thought it'd make a interesting display in my office.
Would you agree with me that it's pretty remarkably coincidental that that would depict Steven Avery's January 1985 mug photo, which was available to you that evening?
One, the photo wasn't available to me.
No?
No.
It wasn't in the array?
After I drew the sketch, I saw it.
Okay, so it was available to you.
No.
It was around that evening. It had been brought over from the jail to the hospital, right?
I don't know when it arrived.
You're telling us under oath you didn't look at it.
I'm telling you I didn't see it, and I didn't know if it was there before I started the sketch either. My sketch is what the victim had me draw,
right?
As what she saw.
We were able to present embarrassingly the difference between an older photograph and what we then had, which was the photograph from that night as to how Steven Avery actually looked. That opened the door to us being able to argue that Couchet drew the composite from the photograph of Steven Avery that was already in their files. And to argue that that never would have happened without the sheriff's participation as well. In other words, that they made the case against Steven Avery that night themselves.
The sheriff told me, I got you now. I got to jail. And the other guys couldn't do nothing. Nobody could do nothing. He had all the power.
Okay, Jeff. So maybe it's time to put up the overlay that a very intelligent Redditor did. Grappler. The guy's name is Grappler from Reddit. And what he did was he asked himself the question as to whether or not the sketch that Jean Couché made was actually a sketch that he independently envisioned out of his own mind, or whether or not he traced the picture of Steven, perhaps using a light box or perhaps overlaying a piece of paper on a computer screen. And what you're looking at now is a sort of an overlay graphic that he did, where he took the quote unquote Jean Couché sketch, and he's overlaying that as a transparency onto the mugshot of Steven Couché from the Judy Dvorak, from the Sandra Morris arrest that happened earlier in that year. So I mean, if you just look at how the eyes just are sort of overlapping, and look at the lines on the right hand side of the mouth, right? How the lips are exactly overlapping, and as Dr. Silkman pointed out earlier, how the hairline is at the top and around the beard, how that's perfectly framing the exact aspects of the face. I mean, the sketch itself is something that my young nephew could pull off. Only 7 years old, but to me, this picture is traced. There's no doubt in my mind that was traced by Jean Couché. And when he says all that stuff to the investigators, there's no way. And maybe you could, if you pull up the transcript, they didn't show the full transcript of what Jean said. Jean said, "I was just a pencil." As he was as he was further questioned, that it was what was in Penny's mind that was transferred onto the paper, and old Jean, he was just a pencil. And oh, by the way, let's get it on the table that if Penny was beaten so bad that she couldn't read the statement, how well could she possibly see the the sketch that Couché was making, right? And typically when you do these police sketches, don't you see things like, oh no, the eyes were a little further apart, no, the nose is bigger, isn't that how police sketching works? That you have to look and you make comments about what you see regarding that, right? I think it's that's the one, right?
I don't know how clear it's going to be coming through. I can try to make it larger, but are you guys able to read that from your vantage point?
Yeah, that's perfect. Really clear.
Yeah. So this is basically the testimony that you just heard.
But I guess what you're representing is that he's saying I was just a pencil, and maybe he's being a little more honest than he cares to be, because if he's just a pencil, that's all he did was trace. And and Kelly, I kind of wanted to. You've never seen this before, and it seems like you had a reaction to that the GIF that we showed.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that one ever on Reddit. I barely go on Reddit. Reddit's not a forum I use. So I had not seen that one in particular. And everyone's always known that it was Trace, but that's just like a holy shit, that was actually really Trace. The details and the fine lines of the hair placements, it's like, come on now. Come on. It's not like Penny couldn't even see out of her eyes. I can't see her like giving description of, oh, you know, this left side of his face, like the hair kind of curled to the side. Come on now. That's
Well, and
next
as
level
we
tracing.
Yeah, and as we see a picture of what Stephen actually looked like upon the arrest, and I just had it here. Maybe I lost it. His hair is much lower. It comes all the way down to his eyes, I believe. Here
Yeah, I think
it.
I put a picture in our exchange, and so the
There we
yeah
go.
that's one. Now that one was not on the exact day that he was arrested, but I think that if I recall correctly, the police lineup, which they're also going to talk about, was I think 3 days afterwards. So that's what he basically looked like. I mean, there's 3 days of hair growth there, but that's what he was at.
I mean, generally, your hair's gonna grow maybe an inch in every couple months or something, right? Like, so he pretty much looked like this. This is also the black and white that was just used in this documentary, which was in the newspaper at the time.
Yeah.
So this is the. I'll just give you a back and forth. This is the one that they had on file, and this is what he actually looked like. I don't see a forehead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, sorry, Big Jeff. I was just going to say, in terms of the lineup, when I've had a discussion with Investigative T before, he actually came out to me and said, ironically, they kind of, when they do lineups and they do like photos and all that to their victims, he even admitted that it's like a power of suggestibility with some of them. They kind of, you know, he goes, it's not the right thing to do, but when we're so sure we have the right person, you know, it's little details like we'll give them a look, and the look like it's like a power of suggestion with their eyes in particular, he says. And he goes, you know, he goes, morally it might be wrong because, you know, what if we're wrong, but it is part of what we have done. And I was like, wow. So this whole showing Penny the picture of Stephen prior and then showing him in a lineup, and I believe he was the only one in the lineup that was part of that photo, initial photo part that they showed.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like the record.
right.
So that's already the power of suggestibility there, because when she now sees him in the lineup, her mind goes back and gets triggered and goes, I've seen that face before. And he says that's part of their strategicness of what they do in the lineups. Again, is it morally right? I don't know, but that is something that is done. I just wanted to kind of line that in there.
No, that's a great comment, and I would agree. I would say I think you're trending towards it's morally wrong, and I would agree with you. And there's just something about this police certainty that's led to these 5,000 years of undeserved incarceration for people who've been exonerated. They just got to stop being so sure of themselves and follow the evidence.
And that's exactly what he said. He goes, I know it's not the right practice, but when we're so sure we have the right person and we just need that little piece, and that's the victim, just to confirm that's the one that, you know, that did it. We just give them that little bit of suggestibility, whether it's an eye movement or it's a certain thing that we say in a detail in a conversation. So we've already not planted it, but we've suggested it, that they remember it, so it triggers them. So when they're standing in front of the lineup, they're looking, and then that one little bit of detail that you've already planted gets triggered in their mind. And again, it's because they're so sure they've got the right person. In most cases, this case, clearly they needed it to be this person, but that was just,
Well,
I'm just trying to find the
yeah.
black and white
Well,
barriers here.
let's have a think for a second about what it means if indeed, Penny Bernstein is giving her description of the assailant, and Jean Couché is either at the time tracing over a picture of Steven Avery, or more likely, since there wasn't a light box in that room, he's already traced the picture of Steven Avery and is just drawing something else and replaces it with that picture either before or after this interview's over. Because there's there's only if he's tracing that picture and substituting it, he has in mind that he is going to get Steven Avery. Why are you going to trace this picture of Steven Avery? Right? Why? There's only one reason why. It's because you're trying to implicate him in the crime at this time. To me, it's not because he's so sure that he did it, because there was not enough evidence to know that he did it, especially on that night at that time. Right? They were going after him, and they were going after him hard. This is a setup that from the very beginning. There's no other way that you can think of something different. Whether he managed to come up with that sketch from just looking at that picture, or whether he overtly traced it. At the time it was made, allegedly, if you believe it was when he was in with Penny, hearing the description and just being the pencil, there's only one possible conclusion that you can come to, and that is they had it out for Steven Avery at that time. There's no other conclusion that you can come to. I don't see how.
I think that's a very good conclusion, Big Jeff, because if you trace back the mere fact that Judy Dvorak had said that sounds like Steven Avery, to me that was the trigger point. That's the match that started the bonfire. The mere fact that Judy Dvorak said that sounds like Steven Avery, and Kucerik had phoned the jailer and basically said, look, assemble a group of photographs. We're going to do a photo lineup. Essentially, a group of people that remarkably look like what Penny Bernstein was describing. There's no doubt that Kucerik would have told the jailer, make sure you include a picture of Steven Avery. Now, the jailer brought down the photographs, and Kucerik had placed them in his pocket. There's good evidence to suggest that both Jean Couché and Kucerik were in the same room with Penny Bernstein. There's no doubt in my mind, I think this is what happened. When the description was being done by Penny, Jean Couché just simply had the photograph of Steven Avery right next to him on a pad and was simply copying it, right? And then in the end, because Steven's 1985 arrest photo was in that batch, and you don't have to be an adult. A 5-year-old can definitely tell that the picture that Jean Couché drew, the hair and everything, matched the arrest photograph that just happened to be in the pocket of Kucerik, right? So you're correct. They basically, from the get-go, seeded in the mind of Penny Bernstein the image of Steven Avery. So hence, when she saw the live lineup, right, she basically remembered, because they're seeding it in her mind, this is the guy you need to point out. And she pointed Steven out in the live lineup. And also in the live lineup, one of the guys was staring remember Big Jeff? One of the guys in the live lineup was staring directly at Steven Avery. So I'm not sure whether one of those guys was an actual police officer. I don't know if they were all from the prison, but one guy was deliberately looking directly at Steven Avery. The whole intention from the get-go was to make sure that Penny Bernstein nailed and pointed to Steven from the get-go.
I think you've wrapped that up very nicely for you, and I agree. I think that's where we're at here. One thing that I would add is that and maybe I won't go back to the file, the picture of the other people in the live lineup, they don't really look like Steven at all. The other people in that lineup don't look like, they kind of resemble someone with a beard, but they don't really look alike. He's the only one that looks like that photo array. And so not only has she seen him before, but he's the only one that kind of resembles the guy that she's being shown. At least that from my perspective, I don't think that they look that similar. I think he's the odd duck out in this live lineup. That's my opinion.
The only thing that was different was the hair, right? Because if you have a look at his arrest photo, because he was photographed the day after he was arrested, I believe, you could tell, and Big Jeff alluded to the point, his hair's completely different. Jean Couchet drew the exact hair outline from the arrest photograph of when he was arrested for the Sandra Morris incident. Essentially, the prosecutors, the civil suit attorneys, and my apologies, caught Jean Couchet out in an obvious, deliberate lie. And you could tell by Jean Couchet's demeanor, Jean Couchet couldn't give a stuff, right? You could tell by his posture, the way he spoke, the way he responded. He couldn't give a damn. And when have you ever seen a person put up a crime scene picture that they drew and hang it up in their office? That's the most bizarre thing I've ever heard.
There's more to that story than that, Dr. Silkman, I think, because that police sketch would have been entered as something evidentiary against Steven. And so the only way that he could have ended up with that is if he asked a judge to release that into his custody.
Correct. So, that's part of evidence.
Yeah. So you might ask yourself, well, why did he do that? He's obviously brazen enough to put this, frame it and put it up in his living room. You can see even the evidence tag on it, right? There's the evidence, that yellow thing in the bottom left of that picture that's up on the screen is the evidence tag. How did he end up with evidence? Well, okay, because he asked the judge to release it, and the judge did. Why did he ask the judge to release it? Was so that nobody else could make a comparison of those two pictures?
100% correct. He wanted to make sure that nobody else got their hands on it. And in a way, it was a trophy. They nailed the MTSO, nailed Steven Avery, and Jean Couchet's sketch was the winner. So he kept it as a trophy in his room, in his office.
Should be a blue ribbon there, not a yellow tag.
Yeah, which is truly remarkable. He caught the big fish, so to speak.
It's really unbelievable. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that it was mentioned in our little private chat here earlier. Is this his only composite? I know he said this is the first composite he ever did.
Only
that's
one.
kind of, and this is the only composite he's ever done.
Correct. And
that doesn't seem fishy to anyone.
Oh yeah, as Big Jeff alluded to, if you have a look, he got the proportions of the eyes perfect, which meant that he either traced it or he had the original picture right next to him. Because one thing you can't do, you cannot reproduce a drawing so accurate. It's almost like he was, quote unquote, staring at a photograph, right, Big Jeff?
Very much so. To me, it's very difficult to get those proportions exactly correctly when you're doing it by hand. And to me, the overlay of the eyes and the lips, especially that bottom right corner of the lips compared to Steven, they're just too exact to not have been traced.
And the hair doesn't. Finally, the hair doesn't come down to the eyes. I mean, if you look at that picture of him, his bangs are down past his eyes. Well, how did he grow that much hair overnight?
or change his hairstyle. Correct. But there's one thing that we got to mention, and that Judy Dvorak was actually a neighbor of Steven. She lived very close to Sandra Morris on the other side of the road, I believe. And it's pretty obvious that Judy Dvorak did not like Steven Avery.
And so I'm sure that they all felt, hey, this is our opportunity to get rid of Steven or one of the Averys. Or
for good.
For good. He really screwed up this time. We got him now, just like the sheriff said. I got you now.
But there's one thing that you showed that our audience may not have picked up, and that was there's a photograph showing Steven Avery's hands, right? And he worked with vehicles and cars and things like that, and his hands were always greasy. Penny Bernstein was asked, "Can you tell me the hands of your attacker?" She said they were clean. That's a very important point. You can actually see Steven Avery's hands were actually quite dirty and black because he used to have motor oil on them all the time. And Penny Bernstein was asked, "Your attacker, can you tell me about his hands?" She said they were clean. That was a clue right there.
And if you take a look, it's not a tan.
No, it's not. And the reason why that was picked up, because they knew what Steven Avery used to do. And it was Judy Dvorak who actually asked Penny Bernstein in an interview, "Can you tell me about his hands?" And she said they were clean. Now, that should have immediately sent a red flag up, but it obviously didn't.
The sheriff told me, "I got you now." I got to jail. And other cops couldn't do nothing. Nobody could do nothing. He had all the power.
The public defender's office got a list every day of who had been arrested the night before. And that was so the public defender could go in and make sure they had an attorney for the first appearance. But Steven's name wasn't on the list. And the only reason I knew he was in jail, and they knew I was his lawyer, because Manitowoc was a small town. Lori called me and told me he was in jail. So I went over and asked to see him. And the deputy told me that the sheriff had ordered that Steven's name not be on the jail list, that he not be allowed any access to the phone, which is illegal, that he not be allowed any visitors, and that he be held in a cell block all by himself so he could have no contact with anybody. Sheriff didn't want him to be able to talk to anybody, including a lawyer. And I never, ever saw that before or since. I mean, he had a right to have a phone call. He had a right to have an attorney. He had a right to be treated just like anybody else.
Those are Miranda rights, right? In the United States, we call those your Miranda rights. And they were clearly violated. So what? That's the thing. You always have to ask yourself or tell yourself whatever they can do to him, they can do to you. And if you don't want this happening
100%.
to you need to speak up about it, right? I don't want this happening. And I want to live in a place where there are Miranda rights, right? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. You have a right to a phone call. He has his fundamental rights were violated. There's a very famous case in the United States of what the heck is her name? Chicago 7. She was set free because of a Miranda violation. I can't remember her name. You know who I'm talking about, Jeff? I'll look it up.
I don't remember offhand. No.
Yeah. Okay. I'll look it up.
One thing that I wanted to add is that this is another example of, she just said, "I've never seen that before." And that's probably like the third time in this case that I've heard of, "I've never seen it before and I've never seen it since" in Steven Avery's legal file. We get to it later when we talk about special tests made with UDT. We talk about it here, being denied a phone call. And it just keeps coming up, this theme of this has never happened before. And we just said with Gene Cachet, he's never created a composite before and never created one since. And if how does that make any sense in this justice system? It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't.
Now, if I could just add, Tom Kusurik was asked about the fact that why, when Steven Avery was arrested at midnight, why he was denied a phone call. Now, listen to this. Geserick said, well, we didn't allow him a phone call because he would have rung up his family and they would have done an alibi for him. so he didn't want anyone to contact Steven Avery in order to establish an alibi. So
Try that.
That's why he denied the phone call.
With a realistic judge, with a logical judge, try to say that to them and say, well, you didn't want him to call his family so they could make a story. What?
Well,
and then on top of it, all of the jail calls are recorded anyway. So
yeah.
Well, if he tried to do something like that, you'd be able to catch him in that crime too, So
correct.
It doesn't make any sense, and it's not necessarily meant to make sense. It's just supposed to be some excuse, just any kind of excuse you can think of.
I was going to say just very quickly, look, I've been studying another case at the moment, and that was the Garrett Phillips case that occurred in America. This was the murder of a 12-year-old white boy in 2011 in Potsdam. Now, the primary suspect here was an African-American male by the name of Nick Hillary. Now, he was a very, very smart guy, and he was being questioned by the investigators, and he says, I plead my Sixth Amendment, right? He had a phone with him, he called his attorney, and they said, am I free to leave? Yes. The moment he got up, one investigator blocked the door. So even though this gentleman was permitted to walk out of the police station, one of the investigators stood right by the door. And the problem is this: if Nick Murray had attempted to touch him or attempted to move out of that place, he would have been arrested. So even though Big Jeff says, yeah, we've got the Miranda rights, and they read him his Miranda rights, they honestly mean nothing. And this is the real problem. You are entitled to a phone call. Steven Avery was entitled to a phone call. Steven Avery was entitled for legal representation. They prevented both. Now, why is that, Big Jeff?
Oh, it's because they want it. But the thing here's the thing: the only way that you can remedy this situation and to make sure people, get the rights that they deserve, is to honor these rights irrespective of who you're honoring them for. And that the woman's name who I was trying to remember before, her name is Bernadine Dorn. I looked her up real quick. She was a member of a terrorist organization called the Weather Underground. She was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list for several years in the late 60s, early 70s timeframe. It might have been one or the other, right? Not both. And she was arrested, and she was set free on a Miranda violation because they didn't appropriately read her rights at the time. And that's what has to happen. There has to be consequences for the misactions of the police. And even if you risk sending somebody like a terrorist, setting someone like a terrorist free, that is the social pressure that has to get put on the police department to make sure that they do it right the next time. You know what? We're going to let these people out, and we're going to let you, Mr. Police Chief, who's an elected official, get voted out the next time for the f-ups of your minions. And we'll see how quickly that this is fixed the next time. But when there's no consequences and this is allowed, right? Yep. It's going to continue to be allowed. So that's the way to fix it.
Yep. But the problem is, Big Jeff, and we all know this. This is what happened to Steven, and it happened to him twice. And it happens to many people. Once you get investigator tunnel vision, and the investigators believe that you are guilty, you're good as dead. There's no way they're going to let Steven out of that prison. There's no way they're going to let a lot of people out from interrogation rooms if they believe that you are guilty. And you're correct, Big Jeff. The people who break the laws, Miranda rights and other laws, need to pay the price. And that's what the civil suit was all about. But unfortunately, as we know, guys, it never got to Geserick or Vogel.
That's right. And I think what's the point, to sum this up a little bit, what's the point of having these department policies, these technical ways of conducting and proper ways, if there's no teeth in the law that says, hey, if you screw this up, you could be on the line, you could be doing something criminal. So what's the point in having all these policies and these laws if there's no prosecution of them, right? It's like having these laws that no one uses, having these, because they'll come back and say, well, department policy says he should have gotten a phone call. We made a mistake. Oopsie. And that's the answer you'll get. And what's the recourse? What's the point of having these policies if there's no teeth in the law, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, the question you're asking is, it's almost rhetorical. There is no point.
Right.
And that's
Exactly.
why, it's, what has to happen in order for tyranny to reign is it starts by one good man turning his back to wrongdoing. And I'm not going to be that man or that woman. Kelly's not going to be that man or that woman, and Dr. Silkman's not going to be that man. We are going to speak out when we see injustice, and we're going to hold it out for the world to see. And that's the only way. That's the only mechanism. And when people hear about this, I think that's why Making a Murder was such a phenomenon. That this injustice was exposed to everybody. You can say there's bias, whatever you want, but people when they are exposed to this type of thing, they make noise. They learn unbelievable. This case has an unprecedented following, and it's because of the perceived injustice that was done. People do not like it when this type of thing happens, and that's what it takes to bring the pressure to be able to enforce these laws that we have on the books. And that's the only way. That's that's the peaceful way to bring attention and evoke change.
Unfortunately, it's going to take people losing their jobs and their pensions and maybe their freedom for anything to really change in that space. At least that's my opinion, and I believe that's what you just said.
You might be right. I think that's what it is going to take, and it's when are we going to stop? I mean, there's people in this country right now who are being held without bail, right? For actions they took, for example, on January 6th. Like it or not, condemn it for what it is. Nobody in this country should be being held without bail. Right, and without a preliminary hearing. But there's people in this country that's happening to right now. Where's the outrage?
Right. Additionally, and there are a lot of capitalistic gaming done with bail and cash bond in this country, and people who are forfeiture laws where they're losing everything they own, and it does become a very, and I guess we could open that up for another time. Anything else before we move on? All right. We're at about 25 minutes in the documentary.
At this rate, we finished the documentary in about 2032.
That Penny Bernstein case was just treated so differently from day one, and it had already started with the whole Morris case.
Morning news. A Maribel area man remains in the Manitowoc County Jail without bail today in connection with the brutal beating and sexual assault of a Manitowoc woman yesterday afternoon. 23-year-old Steven Avery was denied bail on a motion of Manitowoc County District Attorney Dennis Vogel, who cited Avery's past record.
This is not only a violent sexual assault, it's a violent sexual assault of someone who is a leader of the community. I mean, a shining example of what Manitowoc would like its citizens to be. The Bernsteins owned commercial enterprises that were popular and occupied a central place in the town. Tom Bernstein was described as being one of the best things to happen to Manitowoc in the last decade. The Bernsteins were clearly people of substance in that community.
When this happened, I think the sheriff just wanted to get quick results and get a suspect behind bars.
It was the only time in 20 years of criminal defense practice that I ever saw a sheriff that involved in a case from day one.
I was absolutely devastated. It's like, why would they arrest Steve for that? That was so out of his character. People believed he did it, though, because he was an Avery.
I couldn't disagree more with what Arlen Avery just said, by the way. Whereas he just said, the sheriff wanted to solve this case and get somebody in prison fast. Nope. They wanted Steven Avery to go away. Just that all of the evidence associated with this, the lack of investigation that we'll talk about, they had it in for him, as Dr. Silkman so eloquently put before. This wasn't so much a case of mistaken identity. This was targeted from the beginning.
Learned about the case, any of the notions that I had personally came from the police and the courts. Each morning you see if there's anything going in the sheriff's department. I knew Tom Kasurik well. I knew District Attorney Dennis Vogel quite well because we visited with him on cases all the time. He was kind of a part of our news beat. So Steven Avery was on that beat. You get acquainted with all of the regular names, and he was one of them. When his name came up as the guy that they were holding, it was, that would be within, that's in character.
The event involving the deputy sheriff's wife was still pending, and I think that was on everybody's mind. I think the case really turned.
I think I just wanted to point out real quick that it wasn't Sandra Morris anymore, how he described her as the sheriff's deputy's wife. And I can just hear that reverberating through the community more than someone named Sandra Morris who works at the police department.
Turned on the fact that violence was a real reoccurring regular part of his life, that women seemed to be the victims.
But where's the evidence of this, of any of this, right? We saw his arrest record and his rap sheet. It had that, sandwiches and the quarters and the cat. Where's all these police phone calls that he's a regular name? Shouldn't there be some evidence? They didn't show any evidence that his name was regular, and that's not on his arrest records.
No,
where is
you're correct, 100% correct. So you could immediately see what they're doing. They're building up a profile of Steven Avery as being an attacker, a constant attacker of women, right? And what is rather ironical, that in the Manitowoc Police Department, they had a rap sheet as long as your arm on Gregory Allen, right? Who did routinely attack women and was a peeping Tom, right? So in essence, just keep in the back of your mind, when they're talking about Steven Avery and his rap sheet, they're actually trying to give the same rap sheet that Gregory Allen had and trying to place it on top of Steven Avery. The two are polar opposites of each other. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
There isn't one iota of physical evidence in this case that connects Steven Avery to it. The sheriff was told by the police, you have the wrong guy. You need to be aware about this Gregory Allen.
Gregory Allen, who had a long criminal history for sexual crimes, for the use of violence, was operating on an escalating basis in the Manitowoc area. So much so that the City of Manitowoc Police Department was actually surveilling Gregory Allen on a daily, continuing basis. However, as fate would have it. On the afternoon of July 29th, the officers assigned to do the surveillance were called to investigate other crimes. So at the very time that Mrs. Bernstein was assaulted, Gregory Allen was not under surveillance. Needless to say, when the story surfaced amongst the police communities, Detective Thomas Bergner from the Manitowoc City Police Department went to see the sheriff and disclosed to him this information respecting Gregory Allen. Essentially, the sheriff told him not to bother, that they had their man, Steven Avery. Now, in our opinion, that fact alone is bad enough. But more than that fact alone, 3 women in the district attorney's office, based on their knowledge of Gregory Allen, they thought that the police had the wrong person, and they told their boss, District Attorney Dennis Vogel, "You've got the wrong guy. It's not Steven Avery, it's Gregory Allen."
Top Kasurik.
So Jeff, maybe this is a good time to play the Michael Griesbach clip, because Michael adds that little tidbit that we talked about in yesterday's show, or last week's show, I should say.
All right, sounds good. While I set that up, just give us a little intro into what we're going to see.
Right. So what you're going to see is Michael Griesbach, who is somebody who we heard talking earlier in the documentary, and happens, as I said before, to be the assistant, the deputy assistant Manitowoc district attorney at the time that Steven was released. And the clip that you're going to show is him speaking at a sort of a wrongful conviction kind of seminar about how law enforcement, can go bad. And he's presenting and using the Avery case as the Penny Bernstein case as one of those instances where things go way wrong. And it's just fascinating to hear what he says. And I realize we have copyright issues, so we're going to try and play this, for under 3 minutes to keep YouTube happy. And I think 13 minutes is about the right place to start. So let's listen to what Michael Griesbach has to say about this case.
Okay, I'm going to play it from 13 minutes, and then why don't you just let me know when you want me to stop? Just pop in.
Misconduct. I started my comments with misconduct and with prosecutorial or police misconduct. I don't think it's there yet, but soon this case developed into something where it was different. The police, Penny Bernstein went to the police shortly after he was arrested, Mr. Avery, and there were several phone calls made to her late at night, which is often done by assailants when they know their victim. And she thought this was the assailant. Couldn't have been Mr. Avery, though, because he was locked in jail, awaiting trial on bail, with no access to a phone at that point. Penny Bernstein goes to the police, and she says, "Look, I think it might be somebody else." And worse, the police agency, the city police agency, a larger police agency, goes with Penny, a detective, to the sheriff and says, "Look, I think you really got the wrong guy. We've been tracking this other person, Gregory Allen, who matches the description much better. I think he's the guy that did it." The case goes on, it goes to trial. Staff in the district attorney's office actually go up to the DA who was prosecuting the case. "Look, we've seen this Gregory Allen guy in trial.
So I mean that's it. So not only did Bergner go to the go to who's the head of, now it's a little bit confusing because Manitowoc has both a sheriff's department and a police department who at the time were kind of not linked together. They didn't have a common dispatch, for example. Dispatch is the people who say, police, can you go to car 54 or whatever? Can you go to this place? That's dispatch. They didn't have a common dispatch, and the information sharing that they had was not common. So the people who arrested Steven in the first place was the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office, MTSO. And we're talking right now, this guy Bergner, who they just talked about on the documentary, is the Manitowoc from the Manitowoc Police Department, so they're different organizations. But he goes to Kasoric with Penny Bernstein, who's been getting calls within weeks after the attack, as it was Gregory Allen's and other sexual predators' MO to do, saying, I don't think this is the guy. Now, again, how, if Penny Bernstein, 2 weeks after the attack, is saying, well, I don't think it's Steven Avery, how is it that she could, in the trial, in good conscience, maybe not in good conscience, could point to Steven Avery and say, that's the man that did this to me? There's only one conclusion that you can possibly draw, and that conclusion is that she was pressured into saying the things that she said after she came to that conclusion and went to the Kasoric with Bergner, and everything after that was stuff that she was pressured into doing by the sheriff's office, Kasoric and Vogel. There's just there is zero other explanation for her somehow changing her mind about this, because a common occurrence, or I don't know, maybe common is the wrong word, but it's an occurrence for sexual predators to give phone calls to their victims. And anybody want to care to guess what Kasoric's response when he was questioned about this by the investigators was?
Dr. Silkman?
Well, just a couple of things here, right? Kasoric actually told Penny Bernstein not to talk to the police department because it will only confuse you, right? So in other words, Kasoric wanted to have one straight story, and that is the attacker was Steven Avery. The other thing, of course, and look, this is remarkable. Even Penny Bernstein was having second thoughts, thinking, jeepers, did I really pick out the right guy? Dennis Vogel said to Penny Bernstein, how sure are you that Steven Avery attacked you? Penny Bernstein said, I'm 95% sure. Vogel said to her, no, we want you to be 100% sure. So in court, she stood up and pointed a finger directly at Steven Avery. That's it. His goose was cooked, right? And so, you've got this notion, this horrible situation whereby Bergner went directly to see Kasoric and said, I think you've got the wrong guy. You've got people in Dennis Vogel's office who knew Gregory Allen. Dennis Vogel also knew Gregory Allen, right? He's the one that prosecuted him on the attack on the same beach, right? So you have Kasoric and Vogel both had individuals telling them, I think you've got the wrong guy. Both avoided following up any leads. It was a shut case. Steven was the attacker.
So what do you think, Dr. Silkman? Is it possible that Penny was even 95% sure when, as according to Griesbach, she accompanied Bergner to go see Vogel to say that this isn't the right guy? Is there any other mechanism that she changed her mind other than pressure to do so? Did she just have some epiphany?
Well,
or was it people telling her no, it was real? Or did she have that mindset all along that it wasn't him, and she just succumbed to the pressure to say what she wanted to say?
She did. She definitely succumbed to the pressure. Kasoric was a friend of the Bernsteins, right? That's something you got to remember. Kasoric actually knew the Bernsteins, and there was this incredible situation whereby a member of the public actually went to the Bernsteins' store and said, I don't think it was Steven Avery that committed this crime. You know what Sheriff Kasoric did? Sheriff Kasoric found out who the guy was, phoned him up or went to his house and said, if you say another thing to Penny or her husband, I'm going to arrest you for obstruction of justice. So no one was permitted to tell the Bernsteins that I think they've got the wrong guy. So you could imagine how Penny would have been feeling. In the back of your mind, you're right, Big Jack, she would have had some little nagging doubt, right? However, she was convinced because she trusted law enforcement, right? She trusted Kacerek, trusted Vogel, and in the end, she bent to their wishes and pointed to Steven.
Still working.
Or she knew it all along. I don't. What do you think, Cal? I'd love to hear a woman's opinion on this. Would it be possible in your minds for her to have some massive change from I don't think it's him because I'm getting these phone calls. What do you think?
Well, as a woman, like when you're looking into a man's eyes that is attacking you, I think that would become a part of you. It would imprint into your soul. So when she's starting to have doubts, I think that would be a woman's intuition, something red flagging her, saying something just doesn't sit right. So I can totally see that with the calls on top of that, her intuition and that feeling you get when you just know something's off. I reckon that if she was allowed to have gone with that intuition of her knowing that something was not right, I think it would have unraveled pretty quickly that they had got the wrong guy. But because they were so determined to not go down that road because they had already set up the narrative to be Steven Avery, they couldn't go back. They were too deep. And they knew that if they went back on this now, it would have unraveled and still made them look like the assholes that they are. And that's being very kind, that word that I use, but that's probably the PG as best I can get. But that's basically what I think as a woman. Like, she knew in her intuition, like, something was off, but she was permitted to act on it. And I think that's just absolutely a crime in itself, because look what happened after the fact. He went and did it again. That's another woman's life destroyed because they didn't want to stop it.
Correct. And you know what is scary here? This is something we mustn't forget. Penny Bernstein was never shown a picture of Gregory Allen. And Gregory Allen was never part of the lineup, the initial lineup. Now, imagine if he was. Penny Bernstein would have taken one look at his picture and said, oh, jeepers, that guy looks pretty familiar. And that's all the doubt that she needed back then, before the case went the way it did. So she was denied that. No one suggested to her, or how would you like to have a look at this picture? What do you think? And remember, when she described her attacker, she said that the attacker had brown eyes. Mistake number one, right? You could tell that both Gregory Allen and Steven Avery had blue eyes. So despite her attacker being literally inches from her face, she got the eye color wrong as well. So you got to be very careful, because eyewitness testimony can be wrong.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the three main factors for wrongful convictions. So I've always had a problem with eyewitnesses on just that account. My thought of it was the instinct of the woman, like a woman's instinct of if she would have been provided that photo of Gregory Allen, whether the eye color was wrong, could have been that moment where she caught her breath, because it was like, oh my God, it was that trigger of that flashback of that one moment where he's attacking her and she did see him. And that's all it would have taken, was to see at least a picture of him, just to see what her reaction would have been. But she was denied that.
Yeah, but this is going to blow your mind. That picture of Gregory Allen that we see now, that's an older one. Apparently, the one that they had when he got arrested earlier, let me guess what happened to that picture. It's lost. No one knows where it is.
Oh
Of
my
course
God.
it is.
Oh my
Of
God.
course
No
it
one
is.
knows. No one knows where it is. So that photo would have been closer to the time frame that Gregory Allen had attacked her on the beach. They've lost the photograph.
Shocking. So I think what we're looking at is minimally here. Penny Bernstein was manipulated by Kacernik, because had she been allowed to follow her intuition with any reasonable, investigator who's familiar with sex crimes, is going to say, well, we probably got the wrong thing going on here. I tend to believe that, and this is my belief, which is, I guess, in disagreement with some of the people on the panel, that that she knew, and she knew it in her heart all along, and she went with it because she was being pressured and manipulated by Kacernik.
Well said.
Like, I don't know if they would say, you can't, you've ID'd the wrong person, you can't turn around now. I don't know what conversations went on.
But as Big Jeff and Kelly will allude to, one of the most shameful, disgusting things ever was in Peg Lockenschlager's report. And who did she ultimately blame for the misidentification?
Penny.
Yep.
Absurd.
Penny. So Peg Lockenschlager, the Attorney General, ultimately said it was Penny Bernstein's fault because Penny Bernstein picked out Steven Avery. It's nobody else. You cannot get a better whitewash than that.
Do you guys have anything to add to as we wrap up for today? Is there anything overarching that you'd like to add? Anything to just wrap up? And at first, I want to say thanks to you guys for being here today. Appreciate it. I think we're starting to get somewhere. Anybody last comments to wrap up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we are far from done with the 1985 case. And to me, it all starts in the 1995 case and the desperate need that they had to cover up their flagrant misdeeds. And as we learn more about 1985 and I think we've already made a good case for how flagrant an offense it was. It was absolutely essential for them to cover that up, and Steven Avery needed to go. And that is the story of 2005. Look at the extent that they went to get him, all the way, in my mind, to pressuring a woman who was violently attacked. What are they going to, look what they need to do to get him away. He was exonerated on DNA. What do they need to do to get him away the second time to make this case go away?
Good point.
Yep, I agree 100% with Big Jeff. And what's remarkable here in the 1985 case, this is unbelievable investigative bias and also the targeting of a specific individual, and how people like Kacernik and Vogel were trying to squirm their way out of something so obvious. Now, why is this important? Because it now makes you think, if they tried it in 1985, what makes you think they weren't going to try it again in 2005? And in 2005, they went the extra step, the extra mile, right? So there's a precedence there. Yeah, truly shocking.
That's a really good point you bring up, and you're kind of teasing us for later in the episode. Cal, is there anything you wanted to add as we wrap up for today?
No, I just wanted to say thanks again for having us. This is going to, as we continue, I think it's just going to get more detailed, and it might take a bit longer than we expected because there's so much to unpack. I didn't know whether to bring it up now or at the end of this episode, but I think I'll just do it now. I remember when you first watch Making a Murderer Part 1, the first 3 episodes, everyone says, I didn't really know. It took a bit to get into. It was a little bit wasn't boring, but it was just a bit draggy. It's not till you really I don't know if the words appreciate, but when you really understand what the 1985 case means, it's what was needed in these first 3 episodes, because it builds to where we're going in the 2005. So everything that Big Jeff and Dr. Silkman just said, right on. It's setting up for where it goes.
I'm really glad you make that point, Kel, because the way that I see it is almost this episode 1 should have been called Introduction, and maybe it would have suited it better, but I think so many viewers would have skipped the introduction and gone right to episode 1, like people do in a book or something. So, but I do have that feeling that this is really laying the ground floor for everything. And with that, we'll just wrap up for today. We'll be back next week. Unless Dr. Silkman, did you have something to add?
No, but you know, it is so, and I'm really, really glad that you're doing this, Jeff, because it allows us to go back and look at the case again from a different perspective. And as Kelly said, you can only appreciate what happened by deep diving. And you've got a fantastic group of panelists here, and I'm so impressed. Thank you so much for inviting me. But everyone's wisdom here is fantastic. Their knowledge of the case is A1 plus, and it's great to hear everyone contribute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silkman. I just want to echo that, and I feel the same way as you just described. It's this might seem slow. We only got through maybe 15 minutes of episode 1 today, but this is what it's going to take to really break it down. And I agree. I'm glad that you guys are also jazzed about it and want to keep doing it. And I hope the viewers out there are excited and want to keep watching this. So with that said, I will sign off for this week. And this has been Discussing a Murderer.